Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are wading into something that sounds incredibly dry on paper, but is actually explosive in practice.
It really is.
We're talking about the rules that govern your 9 to 5, your boss's ability to fire you, and, your right to complain about it. We are talking about the Industrial Relations Code 2020.
It is a massive topic. And you're right. Industrial relations, it sounds like a college course you'd probably sleep through.
Right. But this code is essentially you called it the operating system for the Indian economy.
That's what it is.
That is a great way to put it. An OS update. But this isn't just a minor patch. This feels like going from, Windows 95 straight to Windows 11.
It's complete rewrite, and that's the context we need to start with. Before this code, we were operating on the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947.
1947.
Think about that. We were using later laws written for a factory economy in the 1940s to manage, like IT parks and gig economies in the 2020s. It was a mismatch.
A huge mismatch. And the sources we've pulled together, this huge stack of legal definitions, case laws, summaries, they all seem to point to this one central tension. It feels like a tug of war. On one end, you have ease of doing business. The government wants companies to grow, to hire, and fire without needing a permission slip for
everything, exactly.
And on the other end, you've got worker protection, Social Security, the right to not get, steamrolled by a corporation. So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out, where did the line move?
Did it move in favor of the boss or the worker?
Yeah.
That is the million-dollar question. If you look at the architecture of the IRC 2020, it's clearly trying to balance both, but there are some very sharp edges.
Yeah.
It replaces 3 old laws, consolidates them, and tries to fix the so-called bottlenecks.
Bottlenecks is a polite word for it was impossible to get anything done. But before we get into the heavy stuff like firing people, let's start with the basics. Who's actually playing this game? Because when I hear industrial relations, I picture a guy with a welding torch. But does this apply to a software engineer? A nurse?
This is where the definition of industry becomes the gateway drug, really. If you don't fit the definition, none of these rules apply to you.
Okay.
Section 2P of the new code defines industry, but what it's really doing is codifying a very famous Supreme Court battle.
You're talking about the Bangalore water supply case.
The legendary one. For decades, lawyers argued over what an industry even was. This case gave us the triple test, and the new code basically just adopts that.
Okay, so walk us through the triple test.
It's pretty simple, actually.
Yeah.
1, is there systematic activity?
Systematic activity, so not a hobby.
Exactly. If you sell lemonade on your lawn once a year, that's not an industry. But if you run a shop every day, that's systematic.
Okay, what's 2?
2, is there cooperation between the employer and the worker? And 3, is it for the production of goods or services?
And notice what isn't in that test profit motive.
That's the key. It doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit. It doesn't matter if you are a charity hospital. If you meet the triple test, you are an industry.
So hospitals are in educational institutions.
Generally, yes.
But there are exceptions, right? I saw a list of exclusions that seemed pretty specific.
Very specific. The code explicitly says charitable institutions are out, but the big ones are sovereign functions of the government.
So defense, atomic energy, space research.
Makes sense. You can't have the Army going on strike because of a labor dispute.
Right.
And the other big exclusion is domestic service.
Oh.
So the person who cleans your house or drives your personal car, they're not covered by the Industrial Relations Code.
That feels like a massive gap considering how many people work in domestic service in India.
It is. It leaves millions of people outside this specific safety net. But for the formal economy, the net is cast pretty wide.
Okay, so we know what an industry is. Now let's talk about the worker, because this is where I saw a specific number that it made my eyebrows go up, $18,000.
The salary threshold. Yeah. This is a game changer for middle management.
Break that down for me, because in the old days, companies used to play all these games with job titles, right?
Oh, yeah?
They'd call you a senior vice president of paper clips just so they could say you weren't a worker and didn't deserve overtime.
Precisely. It was the whole supervisor versus worker ambiguity. If you had any supervisory duty, the company would argue you were management.
Right.
The IRC 2020 just, kills that ambiguity with a hard number. If you are employed in a supervisory capacity and you draw wages up to $18,020 per month, you're a worker, period.
You are a worker, which means you are protected.
You can join the union, you can raise disputes, you have protection against arbitrary firing. But if you earn UD 18001,
You're on your own.
in the eyes of this specific code, yeah, you are excluded from the definition of worker. You're basically considered part of the management structure.
That creates a really interesting dynamic on the factory floor.
It does.
You could have a senior technician earning $17K who has more rights than the junior supervisor earning $19K.
It does. And it forces companies to be very precise about their payroll structures. They can't just inflate titles anymore. The money dictates the status.
All right, let's move to the noisy part of the job. Unions. Historically, India has had this huge problem with what our notes called union clutter.
Multiplicity of unions. It's a nightmare scenario for anyone trying to run a business.
Yeah, paint the picture for us.
Okay, imagine you have a factory with 1,000 workers. In the past, you might have had 10 different unions. One has 50 people, one has 200, one has 12.
And they all want different things.
Exactly. So you sit down to negotiate a wage hike. Union A wants 10%, Union B wants 15%. Union C refuses to talk to Union A because they hate each other. As an employer, who do you sign the contract with?
You can't. It's gridlock.
It's total paralysis. The IRC 2020 introduces the concept of the negotiating union to solve this. It's basically a winner-takes-all system, or at least winner takes most.
This is the 51% rule.
Yes. If there is one registered union that has the support of 51% or more of the workers, that union becomes the sole negotiating agent.
The sole voice. So the other tiny unions can scream all they want, but the employer is only legally required to talk to the big dog.
Correct. It streamlines everything. The employer cuts one deal with the majority, and that deal applies to everyone. It just kills the veto power of the minority.
But hang on, what if it's a fractured workplace? What if the biggest union only has, say, 30%? Then nobody has 51%.
Yeah.
Do they just stare at each other?
No, then you form a negotiating council. And this is where the math gets interesting. To get a seat on this council, a union needs to have at least 20% of the workforce.
Okay, so let's play this out. I have a factory with 100 workers. Union Red has 40 members, Union Blue has 30 members, and Union Green has 10 members.
In that case, Union Red and Union Blue get seats on the negotiating council because they both cross that 20% mark.
Okay.
Union Green, with only 10 members, they are out. They don't get a seat at the table.
Wow, so it really forces consolidation. If you're a small union, you either merge or you just become irrelevant.
That is the structural intent. The government wants fewer, stronger unions rather than hundreds of fragmented, weak ones.
Speaking of forming unions, there was a point in the notes about registration that felt like a trick. It says you need 7 members to apply to register a union.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly low. I could get 7 people to join a free pizza union by lunchtime.
You could, but the code adds a second condition that makes it much, much harder. You need 7 members to apply, but there is a requirement that the union must have the support of at least 10% of the workforce or 100 workers, whichever is less.
Ah, so you can't just be 7 random guys in a 1,000-person factory.
No. And here's where the legal drama comes in. It touches on timing. Suppose you get your 7 people.
Yeah.
You file the paperwork, but while the registrar is reviewing it, which can take time, maybe the employer puts pressure on those workers.
Or they just get cold feet.
Right. And the principle here is pivotal. If the number of applicants drops below half of the original 7, or if that total support drops below the 10% threshold before the certificate is issued, the registration is dead.
So it's a race. You have to hold on to your support until the ink is dry.
Exactly. It prevents frivolous applications. You need sustained commitment.
Okay, let's get into the stuff that makes headlines. Strikes, we've all seen it. The blue flu, the mass casual leave.
The oldest trick in the book.
Explain how it worked and why the new code just hates it.
Well, see, a strike technically requires notice and follows strict legal procedures. So unions found a loophole. Instead of declaring a strike, they would just tell everyone to apply for casual leave on the same day.
Oh, we aren't striking, boss. We just all coincidentally have a stomach ache on Tuesday.
Exactly. Plausible deniability. But Section 2, of the IRC 2020 closes this loophole aggressively. It redefines strike. Now, if 50% or more of the workers take concerted casual leave on the same day, the law says that is a strike.
No more pretending.
No more pretending. And because it's legally a strike, you are now bound by the new notice period rules. And this is arguably the biggest restriction on worker power in the whole cow.
The 14-day rule.
Yes. Previously, you only had to give these long notice periods for public utility services, water, electricity, hospitals, things that keep society running.
Right.
Now, every industrial establishment requires a 14-day notice before strike.
Every single one. Even a shoe factory.
Even a shoe factory. You
Well,
cannot just walk out. You have to give 14 days notice.
it just kills the element of surprise, doesn't it?
Ah.
The whole point of a strike is to shock the system. If I tell you 2 weeks in advance, hey, I'm going to punch you, you're going to be ready for it.
That's the critique from the labor side, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the government's logic is the cooling off period.
Mm-hmm.
The moment you give that notice, a conciliation officer steps in. The law wants to force you to the negotiating table during those 14 days to prevent the strike from ever happening.
So the goal is zero production loss.
Yes, it's a shift from right to protest to obligation to negotiate.
That's a perfect way to frame it. But what if the system fails me personally? We talk about unions, but what about the individual? Let's say I get fired. My union leader plays golf with the boss, so he won't help me. Am I just stuck?
In the old days, often, yes. You needed the union to espouse your cause. But the IRC 2020 includes a fantastic provision for the individual called the deemed industrial dispute.
Deemed basically means automatically considered. Right?
Exactly. It means if you are discharged, dismissed, retrenched, whatever, the law treats that as an industrial dispute, even if no union backs you.
So I can just walk into the labor court myself.
You can go to the conciliation officer, and if they can't fix it within 45 days, you can approach the industrial tribunal directly. It democratizes justice for the worker. You don't need to play politics to fight for your job.
That is a massive win for individual rights. But now, let's look at the other side, the ease of doing business side. The part that has employers cheering and unions, well, not cheering.
300 worker threshold?
This is the big one. Walk us through the Peter Pan syndrome and how this changes it.
So economists have talked about this for years. Indian manufacturing had a Peter Pan problem. Companies didn't want to grow up
Why not?
because under the old law, the moment you hit 100 workers, you entered a bureaucratic cage. You could not fire anyone, what we call retrenchment, without government permission.
And let me guess, the government never gave permission.
Rarely. It was political suicide. So companies would just stay at 90 workers, or they would hire contract labor to avoid hitting that 100 number. It stifled growth.
Okay.
The IRC 2020 raises that threshold to 300 workers.
That is a 3x increase.
It's huge. It means if you have a mid-sized factory with 250 people, you can now retrench workers based on market conditions without asking a bureaucrat first.
Okay, I can hear the employers sighing in relief. But I can also hear the listeners asking, wait, does that mean 299 people can just be fired overnight because the boss had a bad day?
Well, not just because. You still have to pay severance, you still have to give notice. But yes, that government permission shield is gone for those mid-sized firms.
And to balance this, because there's always a trade-off, the government introduced the Worker Reskilling Fund.
Right.
But let's be real for a second. I looked at the numbers. The employer has to contribute 15 days of wages to this fund for a fired worker. 2 weeks of pay in this economy. Is that actually a safety net or is that just a tip?
It's a start. You're right to be skeptical. 15 days of wages isn't going to pay for a degree in data science. It's not a golden parachute.
It feels like a token. Sorry we fired you. Here's half a month's rent. Go learn to code.
It is a valid criticism.
Mm-hmm.
However, you have to stack it on top of the retrenchment compensation, which is 15 days of pay for every year of service.
Okay, so that helps.
Right, so if you work there 10 years,
Yeah.
you get 5 months pay plus this reskilling bit. But yes, the reskilling fund itself is more of a gesture than a solution right now.
There is one protection, though, that I actually liked. The reemployment rule.
The Conport-Tannery principle, yes.
Yeah. Basically, you can't fire people to cut costs and then just hire new, cheaper people for the same job a month later, right?
Exactly. Section 72 says if an employer retrenches workers, but then decides to hire again within 1 year, they must give preference to the people they fired.
So you can't just fire the expensive 50-year-olds and hire cheap 20-year-olds for the same role.
Not legally. If the job opens up again, the old crew gets first dibs. It prevents that kind of churn and burn tactic.
We have covered hiring, firing, and striking. Let's talk about the limbo state. Disciplinary action. This is the scenario where you're suspended because the company thinks you stole something or, I don't know, punched a supervisor and they're investigating.
This is a critical period. You aren't working, so you aren't earning. But the inquiry can drag on for months. How do you feed your kids?
The subsistence allowance.
Yes. The law recognizes that you cannot starve a worker into confessing. So for the first 90 days of suspension, the employer has to pay 50% of the wages.
Okay, survivable.
But here is the kicker. If the inquiry drags past 90 days, and importantly, if the delay isn't the worker's fault, That allowance jumps to 75%.
Oh, I like that. It puts a financial clock on the employer. If they drag their feet, it costs them more.
Exactly. It forces efficiency. The employer wants to finish the inquiry quickly so they don't have to pay someone 75% of their salary to sit at home. It connects back to the fundamental right to life.
And speaking of efficiency, we have to mention standing orders, which just sounds like military jargon.
It's just the rule book. Shift timings, leave forms, what counts as misconduct. In the past, certifying this rulebook was a bureaucratic nightmare that could take months.
And now,
Deemed certification. The government has published model standing orders. If an employer just says, you know what, I'll just use the government's template, they are automatically approved, no questions asked.
so copying the homework is finally legal.
And efficient. It saves everyone time.
So when we step back and look at this entire beast, the IRC 2020, what is the headline? We move from 1947 to 2020. What changed in the DNA of the law?
The shift is from litigation to negotiation. The old laws encouraged fighting in court. This new code tries to force fighting at the table.
How so?
Think about it. The 51% rule creates a strong union that can negotiate. The 14-day strike notice forces a cooling-off period to negotiate.
Mm.
The high thresholds for disputes encourage settling,
It wants to keep the factory running.
always. But there is a cost. And the cost is that the spontaneous power of the worker, the ability to walk out, the ability to disrupt, has been curtailed.
So for you listening, if you're a manager, you have more flexibility, but you have to be much more precise with your payroll and your process.
Right.
And if you're a worker, you have a direct path to justice if you get fired, but you can't just call in sick with 50 of your buddies to make a point anymore.
The rules of engagement have definitely tightened up.
I want to leave the listener with a thought on that 300 worker threshold. We're betting the farm, really, on the idea that making it easier to fire people will actually make companies hire more people.
The logic is that flexibility reduces fear. If I know I can downsize if the market crashes, I'm not as afraid to expand when the market booms.
But the provocation is this. In a country with very little social safety net, is that a risk we can afford to take? Does this create a dynamic economy? Or does it just transfer all the risk from the balance sheet of the corporation to the kitchen table of the worker?
That is the experiment we are living through right now.
And we will be watching closely to see how it plays out. Thank you for helping us navigate this legal maze today.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. If you learned something new, share this deep dive with a friend who thinks labor laws are boring. We will see you next time.